She stood alone in the corner of the briefing room, yet it wasn't the silence that stung her. It was the way no one looked up when she walked in. No nods, no acknowledgement, as if her presence was a shadow that didn't belong. The projector hummed, throwing shifting blue light across the faces of men who had already decided what mattered and what didn't. She adjusted the strap on her shoulder, feeling the weight of her own gear press into her collarbone, a reminder that she wasn't here as decoration. She was here because she had fought her way in. But why were they pretending she didn't exist? The colonel cleared his throat, tapping a remote. Grainy drone footage filled the wall, mountains, dry valleys, and a line of black dots moving across open ground. His voice carried steady authority, every word clipped, rehearsed. The men leaned forward, eyes narrowed, taking notes. She listened too, absorbing every detail, but her eyes didn't leave the shifting images. Somewhere out there, beyond the desert haze, lived the man who had ended her brother's life. She hadn't told anyone that part, not yet. The room reeked faintly of sweat, coffee, and paper, war stripped of romance, reduced to logistics and lists. But underneath the data, the numbers, the roots, she felt the pulse of something personal. It wasn't about orders to her. It was about memory. The colonel's voice trailed and the lights lifted, chairs scraped. Conversations rose like static. Still, not a single face turned her way. Why were they ignoring her? Because she was new? Because she was a woman in a unit carved out of iron tradition? Or because somewhere someone had whispered that she didn't belong, that her presence was a mistake, a concession? She didn't ask, she never asked. Instead, she gathered her papers, her gloves, her silence. The mission was clear: insertion at dawn, extraction before nightfall. Intercept a convoy carrying weapons across the border. Clean, fast, technical, but she knew better. Missions only sounded clean until boots touched dirt. On her way out, one voice stopped her. "You're not on the roster," a sergeant muttered without looking up. His tone wasn't hostile, just factual, like reading a line on a menu. She paused, letting the words hang. "I am now," she answered softly. The sergeant finally glanced at her. There was a flicker, half surprise, half irritation, but no more words. He shrugged, turned away, and the conversation swallowed him again. Outside, the air hit her face like a blast furnace. Midday sun, dry heat, sand clinging to boots and lips. The sound of helicopters thrummed in the distance, restless machines waiting to be given purpose. She walked across the tarmac alone, each step syncing with the rhythm of her heart. Her mind drifted, uninvited, to that night 2 years ago, the last phone call, her brother's voice low, tired, but still trying to sound strong. He hadn't wanted her to follow his path, had begged her not to. "You don't know what this does to people," he had said. She remembered the pause in his tone, the kind of silence that hides more than words ever could. A silence she only understood after the news arrived. Now she was walking the path he left behind, not to replace him, not even to honor him, but to finish something that had started long before either of them understood how it would end. A group of soldiers passed by, laughing at something crude, their voices carrying. One of them noticed her, then nudged the other. A brief smirk, a shake of the head, and they moved on. She felt the weight of their judgment press against her ribs. But beneath it all there was steel. She wasn't here for them. She was here because when she closed her eyes at night, she still saw her brother's last smile, forced through exhaustion. She still heard the crackle of static when the line cut. And she still carried the knowledge that somewhere out there, in the dust and ruin, walked the man who had signed his death. The hangar door yawned open. Inside, the helicopter waited, matte black against the harsh light, blades folded like a predator at rest. She stepped closer, her boots echoing on concrete, the air thick with oil and fuel. A crew chief looked up, expression neutral, clipboard in hand. "You're manifesting on this bird?" he asked. "Yes," she replied. He scribbled something, didn't question further. Practical men rarely cared about politics. To him, she was another body, another risk to strap in. She slid her gear into place, checked her weapon, checked it again. Her hands moved with a ritual that steadied her: magazine, chamber, optics. Each click was a beat in a song she had learned through repetition, one that drowned the noise of doubt. The others began to file in. Some nodded, some ignored, none spoke to her. When the engines roared to life, the ground shook, vibrations running up through her boots, her spine, her chest. Dust whipped across her face, stinging her skin, but she didn't flinch. She stared out at the horizon, endless and unforgiving. What waited out there? Not just danger, not just survival, but the chance to prove that her silence wasn't weakness, that her flame, however small it looked from the outside, could burn forward, leaving behind what couldn't last. The helicopter lifted, and the base shrank beneath them. Inside, the cabin rattled with noise, headsets crackling with clipped chatter. She sat pressed against the window, eyes scanning the terrain below. The world stretched wide, broken by jagged ridges and patches of green that looked more like scars than life. One of the men across from her leaned forward, speaking loud enough to cut through the roar. First time out. His grin was mocking but not cruel, more curious, testing. She met his eyes steady. No. Something in her tone cut deeper than words. His grin faded, replaced by a shrug. He leaned back, looking away. The helicopter carried them forward, shadows chasing across the land. She thought of her mother's voice that morning before she left. The hesitation in her eyes, the way her hands had lingered too long on the photograph of her son. No words had been spoken, but the silence was heavy. It said everything. You've already taken one child from me. Don't let the war take another. But war doesn't make promises. The convoy appeared first as dust, then as shapes, trucks moving across barren land like ants tracing invisible lines. The pilot's voice came sharp through the headset. Visual confirmed. 10 vehicles, armed escort. The plan was simple, too simple. Drop, intercept, secure. But her gut whispered what experience already knew. Nothing was simple when men carried weapons and grudges. The helicopter banked hard. Her stomach lurched. Sand rose in a violent storm as they descended. Boots hit ground. Shouts, signals, movement. The unit spread fast, taking positions with practiced precision. She knelt low, rifle steady, eyes narrowed against the blur of grit. Her breath slowed, the world shrinking to her scope. Through the glass, the convoy grew sharper. She found faces, helmets, weapons. She found intent. And then, her heart paused. One of the men in the lead truck moved differently. Taller, slower, a limp in his gait as he dropped to the ground. His profile caught the light just long enough for her stomach to twist. She had seen that face before. Not in person, not alive, but in grainy photos, in reports her brother had scribbled, in late-night confessions he thought she'd forgotten. Could it be him? Her finger hovered near the trigger, heart hammering. No one else seemed to notice. The team advanced, the sandstorm choking vision, radios bursting with clipped commands. She stayed fixed, scope locked, unable to breathe. If it was him, if this was the man, then fate had carried her across the world to this exact patch of dust. But could she act on it? Could she trust her eyes through grit and distance? Could she risk the mission for something so personal? The moment stretched, fragile, trembling. And then the first shot cracked. The convoy erupted, shouts, engines, gunfire. The desert swallowed silence and chaos took its place. She pressed her cheek harder against the stock, fire already licking through her veins. She was no longer invisible, no longer ignored. But she carried something heavier than orders now. She carried the possibility that the ghost who haunted her brother's last words was standing across from her, in the storm of bullets and sand. The first shot split the desert open. She didn't know who fired it, friend or foe, but the moment it rang out, the world shifted. The line between order and chaos dissolved. Engines roared. Shouts fractured the air. Muzzle flashes lit the haze, brief and violent. She pressed herself against the ridge, scope raised. The convoy scattered like startled prey, vehicles grinding into the sand, men jumping out with weapons raised. Through the crackle of gunfire, her heartbeat thundered in her ears, a rhythm that matched the violence outside. Her eyes locked again on the figure by the lead truck. That limp, that profile, the way he moved with the authority of someone used to commanding men, not following them. She whispered her brother's name inside her mind, as though saying it would summon clarity. Could it really be him, the man her brother had warned her about? But the dust blurred certainty, and certainty was life out here. She pulled her finger back from the trigger, jaw clenched. She couldn't risk firing blind, not yet. A soldier slid beside her, breath ragged under the helmet. "We need suppression fire, north side ridge, now." His voice cracked with urgency. He didn't even look at her to check if she'd obey. He just assumed she would. She shifted, exhaling steady. Targeting the ridge, she squeezed. The rifle's kick was sharp but grounding, the recoil traveling through her shoulder like a reminder that she was still here, still anchored. Bullets struck dirt near the advancing flank, slowing them, forcing heads down. The soldier grunted approval, already crawling away to relay something on comms. She stayed focused, but her mind flickered back to that one face. The mission demanded obedience, precision, teamwork, but her heart carried a different mission, a ghost mission, one no one else here knew about. Another explosion ripped the ground ahead, the convoy's own men throwing grenades to cover their retreat. Heat washed over her, searing, choking with smoke and grit. For a second the chaos blurred into something older, something deeper, the memory of her brother's voice through static. "Not everything is worth chasing. Promise me." But promises crumble in the face of grief. Her squad pushed forward, bounding from cover to cover. She followed, boots sinking into shifting sand, lungs burning. The soundscape was madness. Gunfire hammering in bursts, shouted codes, the helicopter's blades somewhere above still circling like vultures. A voice cracked through her headset. "Left flank is pushing. Cut them off before they regroup." She dropped to one knee, rifle up. The left flank surged forward, figures darting through the storm. She tracked, fired, tracked again. 2 men went down. The rest scattered. Her breathing steadied into rhythm. Inhale, squeeze, exhale, adjust. She had been trained for this, drilled until movement felt like instinct. But no training prepared you for the moment when the line between revenge and duty blurred. Somewhere to her right, one of their own cried out, a sharp, guttural sound that cut deeper than the gunfire. She turned her head, caught a glimpse of a young soldier clutching his leg, blood blooming fast against sand. Another man dragged him back, shouting into comms for medic support. Her chest tightened. That boy couldn't have been older than 20. His face was pale, lips trembling, eyes wide with something that looked more like fear than pain. He locked eyes with her for a fraction of a second, as though pleading, not for help but for recognition, to not be invisible in the storm. She wanted to go, to run to him, but she couldn't, not here, not yet. So she gave him a nod, small, firm, a promise through silence. "I see you, hold on." She swung back, focusing again. Duty demanded forward motion. The firefight stretched like an eternity compressed into minutes. Sand stung her eyes, smoke burned her throat, the ground shook with each detonation. And then, almost suddenly, it ebbed. The convoy had broken. Half their vehicles burning, the rest fleeing, engines howling into the distance. The few who remained were either dead or pinned, refusing to lift their heads. "Secure the site," a voice ordered through the headset. Her unit moved quickly, methodical. Weapons collected, survivors cuffed, wounded patched with frantic hands. But her eyes searched one thing, one man. And then there, amidst the smoke near the wreck of the lead truck, she caught sight of him again. The limp, the stance. He wasn't fleeing. He was standing in defiance, shouting in a language she half understood, rallying the few who clung to his voice. Her throat went dry. It was him. She knew it now, deep in her bones. The man who had commanded the ambush that killed her brother. The man whose name had become a curse at their family's dinner table, spoken only in fragments. The man whose shadow had followed her into enlistment, into training, into this desert. Her pulse hammered, drowning the noise around her. This was it, the moment every night of grief had led her to. But was she ready? A hand grabbed her shoulder suddenly, snapping her back. One of her squad mates. "We need to clear that truck. Move." She nodded, forcing her body into motion. They advanced, rifles raised, covering angles. The figure with the limp ducked inside the wreckage, vanishing into smoke. Her squadmate cursed, "He's slipping." But she was already moving, faster than she should have, reckless, driven not by orders but by something older, sharper. Inside the truck, the air was thick with fuel fumes and burning metal. Shadows moved against the glow. She tightened her grip on her weapon, every nerve alive. A cough echoed, then footsteps uneven, the limp again. She raised her rifle, then froze. Because in that second, through the haze, the man turned. His eyes met hers, dark, piercing, unflinching, and he smiled, not with joy, with recognition. As though he knew exactly who she was. Her breath caught, finger tightening on the trigger. But before she could act, a blast shook the truck, one of the engines finally giving in to the fire. The force threw her back, slamming her against the frame. Her ears rang, vision swimming. When she pushed herself up, coughing through smoke, the man was gone. Vanished into the chaos. She stumbled out, lungs burning, eyes wide. Her squad was shouting, regrouping, dragging the wounded, marking the dead. The convoy was finished. The mission on paper was a success. But for her, it was unfinished, worse than unfinished. It was personal now. Because he had seen her, he had looked into her eyes, and he had smiled. That night when the base lights flickered low and the desert cooled into silence, she sat alone outside the barracks. The others celebrated small victories inside, cans cracking open, laughter trying to mask exhaustion. She sat with her weapon across her knees, staring at nothing. The desert was quiet, but her mind was. She could still see his face, that smile, that unspoken taunt. And in that silence, a question gnawed at her chest, sharper than grief, heavier than duty. What would she be willing to sacrifice? To make sure the flame inside her didn't burn out before she finished what she came here for. The night gave her no answer, only the whisper of wind, carrying dust and memory alike, erasing footprints as though none of them had ever been there at all. Why couldn't she sleep? The others were out cold, bodies sprawled on bunks, boots still on, weapons leaning against metal frames. The faint hum of generators outside filled the silence, steady, monotonous. Yet her mind refused to shut down. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him, that limp, that face, that smile. She turned onto her side, staring at the corrugated ceiling of the barracks. The desert wind rattled loose sheets of metal, a ghost tapping at her thoughts. She clenched her jaw, trying to will the image away. But it always came back, sharper, clearer. He had looked at her as though he'd been expecting her. How could that be? He didn't know her, he couldn't unless. The thought curled like smoke in her chest. Unless someone had told him. Unless her brother had been right when he whispered before his last mission. There are things you don't see, things you don't hear until it's too late. Her stomach tightened. Maybe this wasn't just revenge anymore. Maybe she had stepped into a shadow bigger than she realized. She sat up, boots hitting the floor with a soft thud. Around her, the squad breathed in heavy rhythm, lost to exhaustion. She moved quietly, slipping outside. The night air was cool, the stars scattered across the desert like broken glass. She drew it in slow, letting it fill her lungs. The silence was deceptive out here. By day, the desert felt endless, violent. By night, it pretended to be at peace. But beneath the stillness lay echoes of footsteps, blood, choices. She walked toward the perimeter fence, where the lights cast long shadows on sand. A figure was already there, leaning against a post, smoking. It was the sergeant who had told her she wasn't on the roster. He noticed her, exhaled a cloud of smoke, then handed the cigarette out. She shook her head. "Suit yourself," he muttered. They stood in silence for a while, the kind of silence that wasn't hostile, just tired. Finally, he spoke. "You're not like the rest of them." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "You don't celebrate when we come back. Don't complain when the food's bad. Don't laugh at the stupid jokes." He turned to look at her, eyes narrowing slightly. "You carry something else, heavier." Her pulse skipped. Did he know? Could he see it that easily? She shrugged. "Maybe I'm just tired." He smirked faintly, then let the silence swallow the words. But his eyes lingered on her longer than comfort allowed, as though searching for cracks in her armor. She turned away, back toward the horizon. The desert stretched dark and endless, a reminder that tomorrow would come, and with it orders. Orders she might not be able to follow. Because if that man was truly alive, truly out there, she couldn't walk away. Not until it ended. When dawn came, the briefing room hummed again. The colonel praised the unit, successful intercept, valuable intel, minimal losses. The words slid across the room like polished stones. The men nodded, scribbled notes, absorbed. But her eyes stayed on the map. Red pins marked convoys, safe houses, routes. One in particular caught her attention, an area marked with uncertainty near the mountain pass, a place the convoy had been trying to reach before they were cut off. Her chest tightened. That's where he would go. He had slipped away, not to vanish but to regroup. Men like him didn't disappear, they repositioned. The colonel's voice droned on, but she barely heard it. All she saw was the path leading deeper into the mountains. The meeting ended. Chairs scraped. Men joked, stretched, wandered out. She stayed seated, staring at the map until the room was nearly empty. A shadow fell across the table, the sergeant again. "You're thinking too much," he said. "Maybe," she replied without looking up. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "Or maybe you're thinking about the wrong things." Her eyes flicked to him. "And what are the right things?" He studied her, then straightened. "The things that keep you alive." She almost smiled at that, almost. Later, out by the vehicles, as the squad loaded gear for another patrol, one of the younger soldiers approached her. The same one she had locked eyes with during the firefight, the one who'd been wounded but patched up. His leg was bandaged stiff, but he managed a crooked grin. "Thanks," he said quietly. "For what?" she asked. "For looking at me, out there. I thought I was done. Nobody else even noticed, but you did." His voice cracked a little, raw with something that wasn't just gratitude. It was fear. The kind you carry after realizing how close you came. She nodded slowly. "You weren't invisible." He gave a weak laugh, then limped away, rejoining the group. She watched him go, her throat tight. That small moment, just a nod, had mattered to him. Sometimes survival wasn't about bullets or tactics. Sometimes it was about being seen. But then her mind snapped back, to the limp, to the smile, to the face she couldn't let go of. The squad rolled out hours later, dust kicking high behind their convoy. The desert sun blazed overhead, unrelenting. Radios crackled with chatter, but she barely listened. Her focus was on the horizon, on the shadows that stretched like warnings across the sand. When they stopped to clear a compound, the routine unfolded, doors kicked, rooms swept, shouts bouncing off crumbling walls. Nothing unusual, just another day in the cycle. But as she moved through the final room, something caught her eye. A scrap of paper pinned under a boot print. She bent, picked it up. It was a photograph, grainy, folded, but clear enough. Her brother. Her breath caught in her throat. Not just him, he was standing beside someone, someone blurred, half-turned. But she recognized the limp in the posture. Her hands trembled. The photo was old, weathered, but it meant something undeniable. Her brother had known him. Not just as an enemy. maybe as something more. Her stomach twisted, bile rising. What had her brother never told her? What had he been carrying all along? Shouts pulled her back clear. "We're moving out." She stuffed the photo into her pocket, heart hammering. She followed the squad out, her body moving on autopilot. But inside she was spinning. The mission wasn't what she thought. The war wasn't what she thought. And her brother. Her brother had secrets. Secrets that were now hers to unravel. What did that photo mean? The question gnawed at her with every mile the convoy chewed through the sand. She sat in the back of the armored vehicle, helmet tilted low, trying to hide her face. The others laughed about nothing, trading stories, passing around an energy bar like it was gold. But she barely heard them. Her hand stayed pressed against her pocket, feeling the thin outline of the photograph inside. Her brother and him together. Why? It didn't make sense. Her brother had fought to the last breath, loyal, unwavering. He had hated what men like that stood for. So why were they standing side by side, caught in the frozen memory of a camera? Her stomach tightened. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. Maybe it was before or after. Maybe it was staged. Or maybe. The thought she didn't want to think pressed harder. Maybe her brother hadn't told her everything. The vehicle jolted over a ridge, snapping her back. Dust poured in through cracks, coating her lips, sticking in her throat. She coughed once, quietly. The sergeant across from her watched, not in open suspicion, but with a kind of measuring glance. He had noticed her drifting silence before. He noticed again now. "You good?" he asked over the engine's roar. She nodded, too fast, too sharp. He didn't press, but his eyes stayed on her a moment longer than comfort allowed. By the time they rolled back through the base gates, the sun was bleeding orange into the horizon. The air was heavy with heat, and the world smelled of fuel, sweat, and dust. She moved quickly, avoiding chatter, heading straight for her bunk. Only when she was alone did she pull the photo out. She studied it under the dim light, every crease, every shadow. Her brother's smile looked tired, forced. His eyes, God, his eyes carried something she hadn't seen before, something heavy. And the man beside him. It wasn't just chance. They had known each other, maybe even worked together. Her chest constricted. How deep did this go? The barracks door creaked. She shoved the photo under her pillow, heart racing. A voice drifted in. "You're always apart from them." She turned. The wounded kid, the one who had thanked her. He leaned on the doorframe, legs stiff, a shadow of pain across his face. "They don't notice," he said, almost shy. "But I do. You carry yourself different, like you're here but you're not." She forced a small smile. "Maybe I just like quiet." He stepped inside, awkward, limping, sat on the edge of a bunk across from her. "Quiet's dangerous, out there in here. Gets too loud in your head." His voice carried the weight of someone who had seen too much too soon. She wanted to tell him he was right, that the quiet was eating her alive. But she didn't. Instead, she nodded, letting the silence hang. Finally, he pushed himself up. "Get some rest. Tomorrow won't care how tired you are." When he left, she lay back, staring at the ceiling, her chest tight with truths she couldn't share. That night she dreamed of her brother, but not the way she remembered him. In the dream, he was walking beside the limping man, speaking quietly, almost like friends. She called out, but neither turned. They kept walking, disappearing into the dunes until she woke, drenched in sweat, pulse racing. At dawn, another mission. This time it wasn't an intercept. It was recon. The mountains, exactly where her gut told her he would go. The convoy wound higher, roads narrowing into rocky cuts. The sun was brutal, pressing down with a weight that made every breath heavy. The men cursed, wiped sweat, adjusted gear. She stayed silent, eyes fixed ahead. When they stopped to set up observation, she moved quickly, scanning ridges, valleys, shadows. Every sound was amplified. The crunch of boots on stone, the clatter of metal against rock, the distant cry of some bird circling overhead. Hours passed, heat gave way to dusk, the world shifted from glaring white to muted gold, and then movement. Figures on the far ridge. Through her scope she counted 6, armed, alert, moving with purpose. And among them, her heart jolted, the limp. She whispered a breath she didn't realize she was holding. It was him again, not a ghost, not a trick, real, alive, within reach. Her finger hovered near the trigger. One squeeze and it would end. Her brother's ghost could rest. Her fire could finally burn clean. But a hand clamped her shoulder. The sergeant. "Not yet," he murmured, eyes steady through his own binoculars. She stiffened. "Why?" "Because they're not the target today. Orders are recon only." Her chest tightened, fury rising. "We could end it now." His gaze cut to her, sharp. "You fire against orders and you put everyone at risk. You understand that?" She swallowed hard, the rifle trembling in her hands. She wanted to scream, to tell him this wasn't just orders, this was blood, her family. But she said nothing, because if she spoke, she might break. The men on the ridge moved deeper into the mountains, fading into the shadows. She tracked them until the last figure disappeared, heart hammering with helpless rage. The sergeant released her shoulder, voice low. "Whatever's burning in you, control it, or it'll kill you before they do." That night back at base, she sat alone again, staring at the photo under the dim light. Her brother's smile, the limp, the truth she didn't understand. And the question that haunted her. What if her brother hadn't been betrayed? What if he had chosen this? The thought shook her to her core. Because if that were true, then everything she was fighting for, everything she had become, was built on a lie. The next morning came heavy, thick with silence. She hadn't slept, not really. Her body ached, her mind refused to shut down. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the photo, her brother's face beside the man with the limp. By the time the sun scraped across the horizon, she was already dressed, boots laced, weapon checked. Her body moved on instinct, but her thoughts were elsewhere. The sergeant's words from the ridge echoed, "Control it, or it'll kill you before they do." But control was slipping. At breakfast, she barely touched her food. The others shoveled down rations, joking, elbowing one another. The normalcy grated against her raw nerves. Every laugh felt like a betrayal. How could they laugh when the truth was unraveling inside her chest? Her eyes flicked up, catching one of them staring. Not the sergeant this time. Another, older, hard-eyed. He didn't look away when she noticed. He just chewed slowly, gaze steady, like he was studying a puzzle. She forced herself to break the stare first. Her heart thudded, a warning. The base felt smaller now, every wall closing in. Too many eyes, too much attention. She needed answers, quiet answers. That night after lights out, she slipped from her bunk. The halls were shadows, broken only by the soft hum of generators and the occasional creak of settling metal. She moved carefully, boots barely whispering against the floor. The records room was locked, but locks meant little to desperate hands. She worked the latch with quiet precision, pulse racing with every click, every second that stretched too long. Finally, the door gave. Inside, the room smelled of dust, paper, and oil. Stacks of folders lined shelves, neat but aging. Reports, logs, histories. Her fingers shook as she flipped through files, searching. Her brother's name, her brother's unit, her brother's last mission. There. She pulled the folder, heart hammering. The report was clinical cold, casualties listed, engagement details noted, his death logged as killed in action, ambush, mountainous terrain. No mention of capture, no mention of alliance. But tucked between the typed pages, she found a photograph. Not the one she had, a different one. Her brother again, and the man with the limp, this time not standing side by side but talking. Her brother leaning close, face tense, the limp man's hand on his shoulder, not enemies, not strangers. Her chest hollowed. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a trick of chance. They knew each other. She stuffed the file back, too fast, papers crinkling. Couldn't sleep either. The voice cut the air like a blade. She spun, heart leaping into her throat. The sergeant stood in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes unreadable. Her mouth went dry, words tangled in her throat. He stepped in, quiet, calm, too calm. "You think we don't notice," he said softly. "But we do. The late nights, the silences, the way your eyes burn whenever his name comes up in briefing." Her pulse pounded in her ears. He stopped just a few feet away, gaze hard. "You're hiding something, and if you keep hiding it, you'll put us all in the ground. So I'm going to give you one chance." He leaned in, voice a whisper sharp as broken glass. "Tell me what's eating you alive, or I'll drag it out myself." The air between them crackled, heavy with unspoken truths. Her hands trembled against her sides. Part of her wanted to spill everything, to empty the weight into his hands and let him carry it. But another part screamed, "Don't." If she spoke, she risked everything, her mission, her name, her brother's memory. So she did what she always did. She swallowed it. "I'm fine," she whispered. The sergeant's jaw tightened. For a long moment he studied her, searching her eyes for cracks. Finally, he stepped back. "You'd better be," he said, voice flat, "because out there, fine is the only thing keeping us alive." He left, the door shut behind him, leaving her in darkness. She stood frozen, chest heaving, the photograph burning against her skin like fire. She had escaped for now, but suspicion was growing, the walls were tightening. And if she didn't find the truth soon, someone else would find it for her. The next day, orders came in. They were moving back into the mountains. Her veins turned to ice. Back to the place where her brother had died. Back to the place where the man with the limp waited. And maybe, back to the truth that could shatter everything she thought she knew. The helicopter blades carved through the sky, rattling the frame, filling the cabin with a constant roar. She sat strapped in, helmet tight, eyes locked on the mountains rising ahead like jagged teeth. Every thrum of the rotors seemed to pound in rhythm with her heart. The others laughed, shouted over the noise, their words drowned out but their faces relaxed. They had no idea. For them it was another mission. For her it was a return to the grave. The grave she never stood over. Her gloved hand drifted toward her vest pocket. The photograph burned there, folded, worn from nights of restless fingers smoothing the edges. She hadn't shown anyone, not the sergeant, not the hard-eyed soldier who watched her every move. No one. The mountains grew closer. Sunlight cut across snow-dusted ridges, shadows sinking deep into valleys that swallowed sound. She remembered these shapes, these lines against the horizon. Memory twisted her gut. When the helicopter touched down on a narrow plateau, the rush of wind filled her lungs with dust and cold. She stepped out, boots crunching against stone, and for a moment she felt 10 years younger. A younger version of herself standing here, waiting, hopeful, before the letter, before the silence, before she was flame and ash. The squad moved quick, efficient, voices clipped and sharp over radios. She followed, weapon steady, but her eyes kept pulling left, then right, scanning ridges. Searching. She hated herself for it. Hours into the march, the air thinned, breathing turned heavy. Snow melted into mud beneath their boots, leaving dark stains like bruises on the land. The silence here was not peace. It was weight. Every step reminded her that someone had bled here. Someone had not come home. Night fell hard. They set camp beneath a rock overhang, small fire flickering against stone, shadows dancing like restless ghosts. She sat apart on a boulder, chewing on rations she couldn't taste. Across the flames, the sergeant watched her again, eyes narrowed, unreadable. He hadn't said a word since their confrontation in the records room, but silence said enough. One of the younger soldiers broke it. "You ever think about what happens if we don't make it back?" His voice was tentative, like he regretted it the moment it left his lips. A few groans, a chuckle. Someone muttered, "Don't start." But the young one pressed. "I mean, what's the point? We risk it, we bleed for these rocks and back home," he cut off, shoulders tense. Another shrugged. "Back home they forget us before the dirt settles." The fire popped, no one laughed. She swallowed hard. The words clung to her chest. Forgotten before the dirt settles. Wasn't that her brother? Buried in silence, his name reduced to a file folder, a half-truth on paper. She wanted to speak, to say his name, to remind them that sometimes one life wasn't a statistic, it was a wound, but her throat closed. So she listened. When her turn came for watch, she climbed the ridge, rifle slung, eyes sweeping the valley. The moon cut a pale line across stone, cold and merciless. She froze. A figure, far across the slope, barely visible. She blinked, breath caught. The distance blurred detail, but the shape was wrong, slight limp in the gait. Her heart slammed. She lifted her rifle, scope, catching the shimmer of moonlight. The limp was there, the man was there, alive. Her breath fogged the lens, her hands shook. She could pull the trigger, end it. Questions, doubts, ghosts, all of it buried in one squeeze. But she didn't. Because something inside her whispered louder than vengeance. Why was he with my brother? The man turned, slow, scanning the ridge as if he felt her eyes. For a heartbeat, she swore his gaze met hers through the dark. A long, unbroken stare across impossible distance. Then he vanished into shadow. She lowered the rifle, chest heaving. The fire crackled below, men sleeping unaware. The world shifted above them unseen. She leaned against the rock, trembling, her body torn between the soldier's duty and the sister's ache. The man with the limp was alive, and closer than ever. But what terrified her most wasn't that he lived. It was that she no longer knew if killing him was justice or betrayal. "Why didn't you fire?" The words came in the gray haze of dawn. No greeting, no warning. Just the sergeant's voice, low and sharp, right behind her as the squad packed gear. Her chest froze. She hadn't told anyone. Not a word about the shadow she'd seen, the limp that haunted her. She turned slow, masking her breath, forcing calm into her bones. "What?" His eyes locked on hers, hard and searching. "You had eyes on something last night. I saw the way you froze. You had your rifle up." Her pulse hammered. He hadn't been asleep. "I thought I saw movement," she muttered, shrugging off the weight. "Rock slide, nothing." But his stare didn't soften. It held heavy, like he could peel away her skin and see the truth trembling beneath. "You better start choosing what side of silence you're on," he said finally, "because silence gets people killed." Then he walked off, leaving her hollow. The others were restless that day, nerves frayed by altitude and fatigue. The youngest hummed under his breath, a song no one recognized, and when someone snapped at him to stop, he snapped back. Words cut sharp, louder than they should have been. Even laughter sounded brittle, hollow. She kept to the edges, eyes sweeping ridges, waiting, dreading, hopping. By mid-afternoon, the trail narrowed into a steep pass. Stone cliffs rose high on either side, the kind of place that made even seasoned soldiers twitchy. The squad slowed, every step measured. Her throat tightened. This was it. This was the same terrain. Her brother's last steps recorded in clinical words. Ambush, casualties, silence. Her boots scuffed stone, echoing louder than her heartbeat. Every shadow felt alive. Every gust of wind carried whispers. Halfway through the pass, a sharp crack split the air. Not gunfire, not yet. A stone tumbling down the ridge. The squad froze, rifles lifted, scanning. Her stomach clenched, she knew. She didn't know how, but she knew. The limp man was close, watching, waiting. The sergeant gave silent signals, men spreading out, rifles steady, breath shallow. The pass turned into a chessboard, every boulder a trap, every shadow a move. She crouched low, finger against the trigger, eyes slicing through dark lines and jagged edges. And then, another sound closer behind. She spun. A figure lunged from the rocks, colliding with her, slamming her against the cliff. The world blurred, stone cutting her shoulder, breath torn from her chest. Hands gripped her vest, strong but not killing. A voice rasped hot against her ear. "Don't shoot me." Her eyes widened. The limp, the breathless rasp, him. The man with the limp. Her rifle was trapped between them, his weight pinning her. She could smell dust, sweat, the metallic tang of his breath. Up close, his face wasn't what she remembered. Older, scarred, lines carved deep by years of survival. "You don't understand," he hissed. His eyes burned not with hatred but with something else, desperation. "Your brother." "Move!" The sergeant's voice roared. She twisted her head just enough to see him rushing down the trail, rifle raised, fury etched into every step. The limp man's grip tightened, his gaze cut into her, pleading, "If you want the truth, don't let them take me." Time fractured. Her breath caught between two choices. Raise her rifle and pull the trigger, erase the question forever. Or shield him from her own unit, betray the very men who trusted her with their lives. Her finger trembled against cold steel. The world hung on a single heartbeat. And she realized with a sharp, sick certainty. Whatever she chose, she would lose something she could never get back. The world held its breath. Her finger twitched against the trigger, her chest pressed tight against the man who shouldn't still be alive. The man her brother once stood beside. "Move!" the sergeant shouted again, closing in. His boots hammered the rock, rifle barrel locking onto the target. The limp man's eyes burned into hers. Not fear, not threat, just a desperate insistence, raw and human. Please, he wasn't your enemy. Her brother's face flashed in her mind, laughing, alive, before the silence swallowed him. The weight of the decision crushed her. And then she did something no one expected. She lowered her rifle just enough. The limp man used the opening, shoved away, and vanished back into the shadows of the pass, boots scraping against stone, gone before another trigger could be pulled. The sergeant skidded to a stop, fury snapping across his face. What the hell was that? Her chest heaved. She couldn't answer, not without unraveling everything. The others closed in, rifles scanning ridges, confused shouts bouncing between walls of stone. But the man was already gone, like a ghost pulled back into the mountain. And all eyes shifted to her. The silence weighed heavier than bullets. They didn't speak of it that night, not openly. The squad sat around the fire, each man chewing on his rations like it was wood. Even the youngest didn't hum. No one dared to ask what they'd seen. But she felt at the shift, a fractured trust splintering. When her watch came, she sat alone on the ridge, staring at the valley. Cold air burned her lungs. She pulled the photograph from her pocket, her brother and the limp man. What bond had tied them together? What choice had her brother made in those final days? The truth remained just out of reach, slipping through her fingers like smoke. And maybe that was the cruelest answer of all, that some questions lived forever unanswered. At dawn, they moved on. Orders were orders. Missions didn't pause for ghosts. The squad tightened their lines, no one speaking of the shadow in the past, but every glance toward her was sharper, shorter. She carried the weight in silence, because that was what soldiers did, they carried. Days later, back at base, she walked alone along the wire fence as the wind cut through. The horizon stretched endless, yet she felt trapped within it. Her hand lingered on the photograph before she tore it in half. One piece held her brother, the other the man with the limp. She slipped his half into her pocket, close to her heart. Her brother she buried in the dirt by the fence, pressing it deep into the earth. It wasn't closure, not really, but it was choice, a small act to split memory from burden. That night, in the dim quiet of her bunk, she whispered a truth no one would ever hear. "I don't know who you were at the end, but you were mine, and that's enough. Her eyes closed. For the first time in months, sleep came without a fight. And when morning rose, she was different. Not lighter, not free, but steady. Because sometimes strength wasn't fire, it wasn't fury. Sometimes strength was ash, cold, quiet, carried forward despite the weight. And dignity didn't speak. It simply acted. The camera would hold on her face, eyes steady, silence heavy, before fading to black.